dear students, let's start Standard 11, Chapter 6, System of Particles and Rotational Motion. See, we discussed about the laws of motion, but when we discussed the laws of motion at that time, we considered an object as a particle, point-like object. But in practice, when we deal with any object, it is not a particle, but it is made by large number of particles. It implies that each and every object have large number of constituent particles. So how we can explain the motion of a system of particles, that also we have to understand. And how we can apply the laws of motion which we studied previously to the motion of a system of particles. Now here, first we will discuss a rigid body, and then after we will discuss how many types of motions are possible for a body. And then after, in this particular chapter, we will concentrate our mind on one new type of motion, that is the rotational motion. We already discussed about the linear or translational motion as well as circular motion also. Now we will discuss rotational motion. So here first of all we have to understand the concept of rigid body, right? Here we will consider a system of particles as a rigid body. Rigid body means what? Rigid body is a body which have perfect and definite unchanging shape. For a rigid body, the distance between different pairs of particles, the pairs will not change, the distance between the pairs will not change. In other words, we can say the rigid body means the body for which the relative positions of the constituent particles never changes. So in other words, we can say rigid body can't be deformed. Solid body can be deformed. Suppose we consider any solid body and we apply some external force on it. Then by increasing the force on it, the solid body can be deformed. But rigid body, as per its definition, we can understand the rigid body can't be deformed, because here we say this thing, the relative positions between constituent particles never changes. Now, when we say rigid body can't be deformed, but a solid body can be deformed. So, this is one type of idealization. Actually, in nature, there is no rigid body. But in practice, we consider solid body itself as rigid body when the force applied on it is not deforming the body. So, when we take any solid body, some force is acting on it, under the effect of that force, suppose body execute some type of motion. But during that, if any type of deformation in the body is not taking place, then simply we can consider the body as a rigid body. Clear to all of you? So here we can consider solid body as a rigid body when body is not deforming under the influence of any forces. Otherwise, there is no such real body which can't be deformed under the effect of external force. So, rigid body, that is one type of idealization. Keep this thing in your mind. Clear? Now, next topic, that is what kind of motion can a rigid body have? Rigid body can execute different types of motion. First, we can think about a pure translational motion. Now, in pure translational motion, if we think about the example of a motion of block sliding on an inclined plane. So here, in pure translational motion, the velocity of each and every constituent particle of the body, that will be same one. Or in other words, we can say each and every constituent particle will cover same distance in same time interval, right? So this type of motion, that is a pure translational motion as shown in the figure. Then rolling motion. In rolling motion, if we think about the cylinder rolling on an inclined plane as shown in the figure, then the center of mass here, say this P1, that execute a translational motion, right? And each and every constituent particle execute rotational motion, right? So, this translational plus rotational, this motion that is known as rolling motion, and this cylinder when moving down to the inclined plane, it execute rolling motion. Then rotational motion, right? In rotational motion, each and every constituent particle of the rigid body perform circular motion, and centers of these circles lies on an imaginary line which is known as rotational axis. That is a geometrical line, and we can say the body is executing rotational motion. See here, if we think about the motion of a fan, then each and every constituent particles of the fan that execute circular motion, and centers of their circular path lies on this geometrical line which is known as rotational axis. So we can say this body is executing rotational motion with respect to this rotational axis, right? So see here, for a rigid body, suppose we have a rigid body having arbitrary shape as shown in the figure. Now here, suppose each and every constituent particle of the body is executing circular motion. If we think about this particle P1, it is executing circular motion. Center of that circular path is C1. For particle P2, it is executing circular motion on the circular path having radius R2, again center of the circular path, that is C2. But if we think about the centers of these all circular paths of the circular motion of constituent particles, then those centers lies on an imaginary axis. That is the rotational axis. That is simple geometrical line. Here in this particular case, as shown in the figure, we can say this particular rigid body is executing rotational motion with respect to Z axis here. So we can say this Z axis, that is the rotational axis of this body. Then after, now next motion, that is precessional motion. See the example of the motion of a spinning top. In precessional motion, the body execute rotational motion. See here, the top execute rotations with respect to this particular rotational axis. And here the rotational axis of the body that swipe a cone with respect to this point of contact of the top with respect to surface, that is O. So with respect to this one, this particular rotational axis swipe a cone. So this type of motion of the body, that is known as precessional motion. Clear to all of you?